United States underwent immense change in order to develop into the nation it is today. Multiple sacrifices had to be made that would provoke a constantly expanding and powerful nation recognized worldwide, beginning from the Great Migration by Puritans and Pilgrims all the way to the recently enacted Unemployment Fund. There are a multitude of influential events that would become the foundation of the United States of America. Number one, the American Revolution. After frequent backlash from Native Americans for colonist expansions, which provoked multiple battles, Britain began to impose laws and taxes on individuals in order to gain back its previously lost resources and merchandise. Being that the 13 colonies were contributors to mercantilism, the act of supplying raw materials to a mother country and purchasing its finalized manufactured goods, Americans were not satisfied with Britain's capability of increasing taxes and imposing martial law without American consent. It was thought that Britain began the fights among Native Americans, so the question became, why shall I pay for your wrongdoings? Which enactments such as the Stamp, Sugar, Navigation, Wool, Hat, Quartering, Boston Port, and Townshend Acts, it ultimately led to the Intolerable Acts, which ensured Americans understood the dominance of Great Britain over them. Soon came Common Sense by Thomas Paine, which advocated for American exclusion from the mother country due to an infringement of rights, constant abuse of power, inability to control our own government, and the opportunity of America to become its own world power. Eventually, the Declaration of Independence, written by the five founding fathers Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston, made official the American effort to isolate themselves from the British government in pursuit of individual liberty, freedom, and success, becoming the foundation behind inalienable rights and opportunity. This was one of the most influential events in American and essentially world history, as it conveyed the ability of the people to control how they should be governed, and it was able to instill a sense of hope into other countries that were controlled in a similar way, beginning to fight for their own rights. In addition, the American Revolution was capable of demonstrating to those around the world the ability of the U.S. to become its own nation. At the end of the Battle of Saratoga at the border of Canada, France was finally able to recognize the colonies as its own independent country, changing the tide of the war and officially putting America on the map. Without the American Revolution, life would not be the same, as individuals would not have questioned the authority of a government above the people, creating the concept of democracy, and it would have shifted the focus from a nation that is driven by the success and will of the people to nations and states that need to support a mother country. Number two, the Louisiana Purchase. There has always been a drive for expansion within the U.S., whether being to expand industry, cultivate more land, or to simply expand American boundaries. The need to expand the empire has always been a thought among early colonists. The concept of manifest destiny, where it was the duty and destiny of American civilization to expand throughout the continent, is what assisted in the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France for 15 million, equivalent to 42 million in today's society. France decided to sell the territory in order to support the Great French War, as Britain re-entered and France was losing control of the Haitian Revolution. The Americans were able to gain Louisiana, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and most of the land in Kansas, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Minnesota. This was truly one of the most influential events of the century simply because it was able to truly accommodate the needs of many Americans during the time. Although it was not cultivated until later years, with individuals crossing the Great Plains and mountains to get to California, it was able to expand the appearance and boundaries of American civilization, which in turn symbolized both a growth in power and strength. Being that the American territory practically doubled with a simple wave of a pen and $15 million, it was seen as a very beneficial aspect of American history as it allowed the federal government to get stronger, provided more land for farming and other goods, and provoked a stronger economy with the port of New Orleans allowing more diversity and opportunity. Number three, the stock market crash of 1929. Moving forward in history to after World War I, the first heavily economical war the U.S. was involved in, there was an increase in unemployment with the return of soldiers and widespread financial panic. Since wars allowed for individuals to work toward a common goal with reasonable pay, the end of the war caused a sudden drop in wages and crop values. Since the need for large portions of crops and meat was lessened because of armistice, farmers had land that was no longer needed and produced more than they could sell. They began to approach the point of destroying crops as it would cost less than maintaining them. During this time period, there was also the concept of buying on credit or margin, where individuals had the mentality of buy now, pay later. This slogan would prove to pave the way to American demise, as there was not an official government system to keep track of loans and borrowed sums. Individuals used this strategy in the stock market as it would often result in quick increase in money. However, with the national banks running out of physical cash, individuals' life savings were gone and the stock market failed. This marked the beginning of the Great Depression, as individuals had to sell their homes, cars, clothing, etc. for food to feed their families. It was only through the presidency of FDR that Americans had hope of a better future, as they could move on and build back civilization. The stock market crash was one of the most influential events in history, as it was the main factor that allowed FDR to impose a new system of banking and bank holidays that ensured smooth sailing and a growing economy. It allowed individuals to have the option to pay on credit while ensuring that life savings were no longer in jeopardy. It was the crash that allowed Americans to see the effect of abusing a new system that was not officially refined and strengthened. The stock market crash was inevitable following a time of extreme nationalism and unity. However, without it, systems of economy and the greatest economic system in the world would not have been on the same level today, offering countless jobs to qualified individuals on Wall Street and providing a perfect combination between success and failure when supporting industries. Number 4, Hiroshima's atomic bomb leading to the Cold War. World War II was essentially a tough pill to swallow. Both Hitler and Stalin contributed to mass genocide, which was the ultimate goal under the fascist government of Hitler. The Americans attempted to stay neutral during the war, however, it was clear that with the Lend-Lease Act and the meet between Britain and America discussing territories and bases in the event of a German attack, that the Americans were not neutral. The events that contributed to the joining of the war was Pearl Harbor by Japan, Japanese control of China and empire building, the fear of the spread of fascism, and unrestricted submarine warfare. After the U.S. was able to finally defeat Germany, slowly returning Europe back to a previous state of territory and solitude, America was able to fully dedicate all its resources against Japan in an initial two-front war. The increase in technological advancements and the final creation of the atomic bomb, it became a question of whether or not Americans wanted to sacrifice their own men for a country that is willing to kill one American in exchange for 10 of their men, or to drop a bomb in a warned civilian location destroying Japanese society. Clearly, the decision to drop the bomb was final and ultimately led to another dropping of nuclear weapons, providing a sense of hopelessness to both Japanese and American politicians, questioning if dropping the bomb just raised future concerns of deadly weaponry. With the bombing of Hiroshima killing tens of thousands instantaneously and hundreds of thousands from radiation poisoning, other nations, primarily the Soviet Union, did not want the US to be the only nation with such power, soon turning into the nuclear arms race, aka the Cold War. On August 29, 1949, the Soviets conducted their first nuclear test, raising the number of nuclear world powers to 2. This was a very devastating but influential point in history, as the decision to drop the bomb in exchange for the lives of another 100,000 American citizens put future generations at risk of mass genocide, as other nations immediately began to test their own projects. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a perfect representation of the event of nuclear weaponry, as the US and USSR were seconds away from deadly warfare that would have torn apart nations. The U.S. had warheads pointed against them only 90 miles from southern Florida, which is an extremely tense situation. However, the ability to move away from that with the one vote of Premier Nikita Khrushchev demonstrated to officials the severity of the situation and how close governments were to causing the deaths of millions of people over a miscommunication. Without the first atomic bomb against Japan, there would not have been such a high threat in American and foreign societies that led to the Cold War, and times where humanity could be wiped from existence from the turning of a key. Number 5, the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon. As previously stated, during times of war, a nation is typically unified under a common goal. A similar scenario occurs for foreign attacks on native soil. Pearl Harbor caused immediate backlash and a drive for revenge in the American people, while also posing hatred to Japanese American citizens. One of the most horrific and memorable events of American history was the 9/11 attacks, in which 2 passenger planes crashed into New York City's Twin Towers, killing 265 passengers immediately, and 1 plane crashing into the Pentagon, killing 125 passengers. There was a total of 2,977 individuals killed during 9/11, and the number continues to rise from the debris and smoke that polluted the air and lungs of individuals during the attack. Stations, TVs, radios, every form of entertainment was paused and began broadcasting the event, in which people began to jump off the top floor, witnessing nothing but flames underneath them. It was a horrific sight, seeing not 1, but 2 planes crash into the pedestrian-filled structures, and soon after, watching the buildings collapse on itself. The attacks caused a sense of loss, determination, and hatred, as there was an increase in prejudice against Islamic individuals, yet a push for unity in an unexpected attack. 9/11 was performed by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, seeking retaliation for American support of Israel, involvement in the Persian Gulf War, and military presence in the Middle East. The planes that crashed into the towers were Boeing 767s, planning on traveling to California, carrying thousands of tons of gasoline, and becoming guided missiles once hijacked. One plane had left Newark Airport behind schedule due to the New York attacks and was soon expected to attack either the White House, Capitol, or one of several nuclear power plants in the east. All the passengers passed away on that flight after attacking the hijackers and accelerating towards the ground at over 500 miles per hour. George W. Bush was the president at the time and defined his presidential election as he declared a war on terrorism that led to investigations into the motives and execution of the attack and ongoing military engagements in Afghanistan and Iraq. Essentially, the 9/11 attack was a time of immense loss, depression, and hopelessness. Everyone in the United States had a moment of stillness as shock took over the moment in New York. The attacks were able to demonstrate the importance of unifying under a common goal and to end possible further attacks on normal civilians. The declaration of war on terrorism was beneficial for the nation at the time, as it was able to unify most individuals under a common goal and push toward individual safety. Although the attacks were extremely disturbing and hurt the nation immensely, it truly was a factor in spreading awareness and ending terrorism and attempting to make the world a better place. There are multiple events that are capable of defining the development of the American society. However, the American Revolution, Louisiana Purchase, stock market crash, Hiroshima's atomic bomb leading to the Cold War, and the 9/11 attacks are by far the most significant and influential events of American history.